the Ascends at Boston Avenue podcast. My name is Philip Boone, and my co-host is Caitlin Drake. Before we begin, I'd like to state that the views represented in this podcast are those of the individuals in this conversation and not the official position of Boston Avenue United Methodist Church.
Today, our guests are Minister of Elementary School Children and Adults, Reverend EvaMarie Campbell, and psych nurse at an inpatient facility here in Tulsa, Courtney Boone. Our conversation will center on the intersection of faith and mental health. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
First of all, we want to talk about the Bible. Is mental health discussed anywhere in the Bible?
I think it's important to realize that the Bible never explicitly speaks about mental illness in the terms of how we would define it today in modern times. However, the Bible does have stories of people like David and Job and Elijah and Jonah, who we read their stories of struggling with deep feelings of despair and anger and depression and loneliness. And Jesus gives us a good example for how to care for each other in the story of the Good Samaritan. When the Samaritan comes across the badly injured man on the side of the road, he takes him, bandaged him, and cared for him until he recovers. So that's ways that the church can be involved in caring for people.
And for our readers, that was Reverend EvaMarie Campbell speaking. So kind of our next question. We know there are faith communities or faith leaders who would suggest that you should pray or go to church more as a solution to any mental health issues rather than pursue therapy or medication. What would you say to that perspective?
I would say I absolutely believe in the power of prayer. I believe that faith communities can be healing to people with mental health. I also feel like God provides gifts and talents and skills to certain people that can take those illnesses further than maybe where the church can, that can people who have been able to research different methods of treating mental illness, discovering medications that can change brain chemistry in depression and anxiety, things like that. And so I think it's important to use the church as much as we can, but also not rely entirely on the church and to rely on other areas where God has provided those things for us through other people.
Would the two of you mind telling us about your personal journey around mental health?
Sure. This is EvaMarie, and my experience started about 19 years ago when we were expecting our first child. And if you know me, I took every class they offered. I read every book they had. I had the perfect birth plan on file at the hospital where I was planning to deliver. And once my water broke, nothing went according to my plan, which was very hard for me to deal with that. And after 14 and a half hours of labor, I ended up with an emergency C-section. And then on top of that, I was all ready to breastfeed. That was 19 years ago. There was a heavy emphasis, billboards in the city about breast is best and breastfeeding. And I was gung-ho, ready to do that, took all the classes, had all of the right stuff. And after 6 weeks, it was clear that that was not working. So again, it brought feelings of failure. I felt like I couldn't even give birth right. I had a C-section. I couldn't nurture or feed my own child. And I felt like she would be better off without me, spiraling down very, very quickly. One day, in January, I brought her here to our weekday preschool where she would be able to come. And the woman who was actually her caregiver for that class had been my birth doula. She had been with me through the pregnancy and all. And when I handed my child to her, I said, I really think she would be better off without me. And that person said, are you sure about that? And I said, yes. And by the time I made it to my office, the phone rang, and a wonderful person who is a trained postpartum doula called me because Hannah's teacher had called her and told her about me, and she reached right out to me, and I just told her everything that I had been feeling, and she visited with me, and through the course of that, I learned about the term postpartum depression. Of course, I didn't learn about that before because that wasn't going to happen. That wasn't going to be a part of my story. Finding that it was, and this person encouraged me to talk with my physician, which I did, and this person also had been coordinating a postpartum depression support group and needed a place to have it and needed some resources and all. And so we partnered together, and for 15 years, Boston Avenue Church hosted a postpartum depression support group, which in my time here, of all the things I've done, that time of 15 years with women struggling through this issue and seeking help has been the most meaningful time for me. And to know that you're not alone in this struggle, that others do. And we were able to come do some interviews with the Tulsa World, and 2 of the different TV stations had us on to interview. And once people learned what I have been going through, the support that this church gave to me was overwhelming. So many cards and notes and letters that people mailed to me offering their support, their kind words. The women who would pass me in the hall at church and hug me and whisper in my ear that they had struggled with that as well, or that they knew someone who had. So it was like raising the curtain on a stigma and letting people know it's out there and there are ways to seek help and enjoy your baby and your time.
My story is very similar. After my first daughter was born, the anxiety that I had always had my whole life was just multiplied by a million after she was born. And I remember very vividly putting her down for bed for the night and just panicking that she was going to wake up. Oh my gosh, if she wakes up, she's not going to grow right. Her brain's not going to develop correctly. And it just was this fear that took over. To the point where it was impacting my marriage. I was fighting with my husband a lot. I was scared to go to work during the day. I had the same feeling of that she would just be better with someone else. And so it got to the point where it was just too much for me to handle. I started seeing a therapist, and I had, at least at the time when I was having children, postpartum depression was talked about. There were signs I was supposed to be looking for, but this didn't fit that. So I thought, well, then it's just something with me. It's fine. I'll get through it. And I think she was about 6 months old when I was like, this is not working. I didn't want to go into work any day because I was so exhausted from all of these feelings I was having. So I saw a therapist. She recommended I go to a doctor and find out about getting on some medication. I was still breastfeeding, so I had to go through my doctor, Adele's pediatrician, my OBGYN. We finally found something that worked. And it took a couple weeks, but I remember the first time that I had put her down at night and she started crying, and at the point Philip and I were taking turns when she started crying going in, and it was the first time that I was able to say, wait, give her a second, like we don't have to go in right away. If she cries for a couple of minutes, it's going to be okay. And that was life-changing, that like my baby can cry and that doesn't mean that the world is ending. That was my story.
So I think your stories together show this trajectory, right, of mental illness having less of a stigma, or that stigma fading, at least in regards to postpartum issues. Have you seen any reason behind this, additional education, or is it maybe things like EvaMarie's story where somebody just spoke up more?
There's definitely more education going on around the issue of postpartum depression, and a lot of things online and groups that are helping and just raising the issue that people can talk about this and share with others. I know for me, once I heard that somebody, not that you take joy in other people's pain, but to know that I wasn't the only one who had felt that way, was really helpful to me.
And I think we're seeing a lot of that in social media, is allowing someone to have the courage to say, this is going on with me, things are not good. And other people seeing that and saying, hey, that's how I feel too. And I think that we hear so much about how the anonymity behind a computer screen is bad, it leads to cyberbullying, things like that. But I think it's also really positive. I think it allows people to say, I'm having a hard time, without having to look somebody in the eye and say, I'm having a hard time. So I think social media is a big part of why there's less stigma around this.
People's faith community has a lot to do with how they're doing. There are a lot of support groups in a faith community, like EvaMarie mentioned. For 15 years, there was the postpartum depression support group. Are there ways that being part of a faith community can help support your mental health?
You bet. I think that people who are involved in a Sunday school class on a regular basis certainly receive support. Our Sunday school classes are great at care of each other and nurturing each other. Being involved in small groups is a very good way to have support, and our United Methodist Women circles are very supportive of each other and give you safe places to share what's going on and offer help.
I agree. I've seen more churches lately doing things like the Blue Christmas services around Christmas time, where they're kind of allowing people to acknowledge that that's a hard season, and instead of let's just make Christmas happy and ignore all that, kind of sit in that grief and feel it with people around you, with that community.
And here at Boston Avenue, we have what's called the Longest Night service, which is that kind of same space to open up that while this is a period for joy and celebration, it's also a period for grief and can be really hard for people for a lot of reasons. Right. Can you think of additional faith practices either that are offered in communities or that you've been a part of that can help boost our mental health?
At Boston Avenue, we have members who are very attuned to mindfulness, and there are several great resources out on mindfulness. And if you were to ask any of the clergy here, we would be able to direct you to places to focus more on the practice of mindfulness and how that can help with your mental health.
And I personally do a holy yoga class once a week that focuses a lot on prayer, meditation, mindfulness, deep breathing techniques, things like that can help with some mental health issues.
We're recording this podcast now because we know that both the winter months and the busy holiday season can take a toll on people's mental health. There's reduced sunlight, stressful activities, people trying to do it all, dealing with loss and grief during a time that emphasizes family and tradition. What advice do you have for these people?
One of the things that I just started doing last winter that I have found helpful is having a light box. Because as you said, the days are getting shorter, it's getting darker earlier, and needing to have exposure to light can really be helpful. And my doctor actually recommended getting a light box. You can get them pretty easily off of Amazon and different places. And to just have that light present has been helpful for my times when it's getting darker earlier.
That's actually a treatment we use often in my hospital. We have patients who'll get up in the morning and they'll have the light box in front of them for however many minutes the doctor recommends, so it's very helpful. Personally, my mom died around this time of year a couple of years ago, so it's a tough time of year, I'd say probably for our whole family because it impacts how I act around my family. Things that have helped me, though, I think are to be able to plan ahead, to kind of have a loose idea of what the holiday is going to look like. But then again, with that, we had a loose plan last year and our baby ended up in the hospital over Christmas. So I think it's also really important for people who are struggling that time of year to know that your holiday is not necessarily going to look the way you think it's going to look, and that's okay. And even for people who aren't struggling with grief and loss and things like that around that time of year, I think it's good to know that sometimes traditions have to change, and that's okay. So you're not struggling with that rigid, it has to look exactly this way every year.
Particularly for Christians, do you think there are ways to think about the Christmas season that can help support our mental health rather than grate on it?
Certainly, as we've talked about with mindfulness, with spiritual practices, and as you referenced earlier, we have an every Friday at noon a Christian meditation time in the Rose Chapel, focusing on scriptures that boost you up or scriptures that show that you're not alone. I know when I was dealing with postpartum depression, a scripture that would run through my head, I can do all things through him who strengthens me, from Philippians 4:13. So keeping scriptures in the forefront that are meaningful and helpful to you can be good.
I think also it's talked about how busy we are around the Christmas season, but that can be seen as a good thing. There's more opportunities for community in the church because there's so many more activities. And not always, happy activities. There's meditation. There's opportunities to pray with other people. So it can support our mental health in that we are in community more often than we would be other times of year.
Particularly for Christians, are there good mental health resources available that you know of?
Particularly Christian, but I do know, at least in Tulsa, we have COPES, which can be called, which stands for the Community Outreach Psychiatric Emergency Services. So if anyone's struggling, they can call them. All the time for everybody in the nation, they have the National Suicide Hotline, which is 1-800-273-TALK. I actually used to volunteer for them, so I can speak personally that they are well-trained, have a lot of resources usually sitting right in front of them, and they pick a time to specifically just sit there and talk to people so that you don't have to worry about them being too busy for you or not wanting to talk to you. Anyone can call them at any time about any issue and get the help they need.
Thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I'd like to add that as the clergy of Boston Avenue Church, I know any of us would be willing to sit down and talk with someone or to help offer resources or places to seek the help that they might need, because we know that God wants us to live to our fullest potential, and any way that we can go about doing that, we would want to help make that happen for others.
And as someone who works in mental health, I would have to say, if you're concerned about anyone feeling suicidal or having thoughts of harming themselves, please ask them. Say the words. Are you feeling suicidal? Are you having thoughts of hurting yourself? I know a lot of people are concerned that they may give somebody the idea or push them over the edge. That's not the case. You're putting a name to how that person is feeling and letting them know that there is somebody there who's paying attention to them.
Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been the Ascends at Boston Avenue podcast. We are located at 1301 South Boston Avenue in downtown Tulsa, Oklahoma. Please check out our social media for more information on what's going on at Boston Avenue United Methodist Church. We can be found on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. We will talk to you next time. Thank you.